Hello, boys and girls. Thank you for joining me, Dan the Storyman, for another story. And today we're going to read Andy Ant, The Adventures of Andy Ant, The Swimming Hole Disaster. Ooh, it's starting to get warm and thinking about swimming, and let's learn more about Andy Ant and his friend Joey and what they do together. Dear boys and girls, have you ever done something that you knew you weren't supposed to do it until you had already done it? Well, that's what happened to Andy and me. We learned how important it is to obey our moms and dads and how important it is to keep promises. I hope you learned as much as Andy and I did. Sincerely, Joey. Oh, there's a letter that Joey wrote to all of you. That's pretty cool. All right, let's see what Andy and Joey do today. It was a hot summer afternoon as I walked outside. I was sure glad that my mom had said I could wait until evening to finish pulling the weeds in the garden. I walked over to the crack in the sidewalk and looked in. I wanted to see if Andy Ant was in his room. I bent over and whispered, "Andy, are you in there?" I have to whisper because Mr. Davis, our next door neighbor, was out in his yard. If he heard me, he might think I was talking to the sidewalk, and I didn't want to have to explain what I was really doing. Most grown-ups would think talking to ants was even stranger than talking to the sidewalk. It's true. There's Joey trying to find Andy. See if he's in his room. Right into the sidewalk. Andy Ant. There was no answer from Andy, so I thought to myself, where would an ant go on a day like this? Well, I knew where I would be if my mom hadn't told me not to leave the yard. I'd be over at the swimming pool. And I knew Andy and I think a lot alike, even though he's a philosopher. That's what we call Andy because he has deep thoughts and understands how important it is to do things right. And I'm just what he calls a regular kid, so maybe he was at his swimming hole. I walked over to the ant swimming hole. It's where the gutter dips along the curb in front of my house. Sure enough, there was Andy. He was lying on his beach towel, sleeping. "Hey, Andy, what are you doing?" I asked as I kneeled down. There's Andy, just on the curb, right near the sidewalk, the end of the sidewalk, seeing what he's doing. Andy slowly opened up his eyes. "Hi, Joey," he said with a smile. "I'm just waiting for Parker to come out so I can go swimming." Parker is Andy's older brother, a real practical kind of ant. "Why do you have to wait for Parker?" I asked Andy. "The water isn't going to be any warmer if Parker is here, is it?" Andy just made a face at me. "I have to wait for Parker because my dad said to. You see, Parker is a better swimmer than I am, and my dad said I can't go swimming without Parker." "Oh, you're a great swimmer," I said. "What could possibly happen?" "Well, I don't know," Andy started. "You do whatever you want," I said. "But I don't think your dad realizes you're getting old enough to do nearly anything you want." At first, Andy looked a little unsure. But as I talked, he became more confident, and nothing could go wrong. Besides, it was a hot day, and the water would feel great. Then I thought of something myself. "Andy," I said, "I can watch you. My mom said I couldn't leave the yard, so I'll be here. You'll be perfectly safe." Andy brightened up. There's Joey talking to Andy. Should Andy go swimming without his brother Parker? His dad said not to. Do you think Joey should have encouraged him to not listen to his father? Let's see. "I guess you're right, Joey. There isn't really any reason to wait, and the sun is so hot." With that, Andy jumped up from his beach towel and headed for the diving board. It wasn't a real diving board. It was an old branch that hung over the curb. But it worked for the ants. With as much grace and poise as a fourth grade ant could muster, Andy did a gliding ant dive into the water. Actually, a gliding ant dive is a lot like a swan dive. but Andy thinks swans eat ants, so we don't use that name. Andy came to the surface of the water and hollered, "Wow, Joey, the water's great! Too bad the gutter isn't bigger, so you could come in too." I sat on the edge of the curb, watching Andy as he swam and did some other dives. Every time he looked at me, he would tell me how nice the water was. Oh, there's Andy, doing a dive into the water. Should Andy be going swimming without his brother Parker there? Should Andy be disobeying his parents, his dad? I don't know. I don't think so. The sun was getting hotter and hotter, and I'd had just about enough of Andy saying how great the water was. Then I noticed some kids up the street gathering around a fire hydrant. Wow, I thought, wouldn't it be great if they were going to turn it on? Sure enough, that's what the firemen were getting ready to do. By now, Andy had gotten tired of swimming and had crawled up on a floating leaf. He looked like he was asleep again, so I decided not to bother him. I would just run up the street for a while to play in the water from the hydrant. I got there just as the water shot out of the hydrant. It felt really good. Boy, what fun on a hot summer day. I turned to look back down the street, and I froze. Uh-oh. He looks like he's having a good time. See, he's in the water there. He's with some of his friends, having a good time. And then he froze. Why did he freeze? Why was he scared all of a sudden? Why do you think? What was he thinking? A wall of water was rushing down the gutter, right toward Andy's swimming hole. I was sure that Andy was still fast asleep on the leaf. If he didn't wake up and get out of the swimming hole before the water hit, he would be washed right down the storm sewer drain. I ran toward him, yelling, "Andy! Andy!" As I got closer, I saw Andy on the leaf, sleeping away. "Andy, wake up!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. Our neighbor, Mr. Davis, looked all around to see who I was yelling at. I knew I would have some explaining to do later, but I didn't care. The important thing was to warn Andy. But it was too late. The wall of water hit the swimming hole, and Andy was on a one-way trip to the storm sewer. Uh-oh. There's the water from the fire hydrant coming to hit Andy, and there's Andy riding on a big wave on his leaf. Oh, no. Andy! Oh, man. "Andy, Andy!" I continued to yell. Just as the leaf was about to wash down the drain, Andy woke up. Seeing what was about to happen, he grabbed the edge of the leaf and looked back at me. The last words I heard him say were, "Go get Parker quick!" And then he was gone down the sewer drain. Oh no, look at Andy down here. Do you see him? Do you see him down there? He's about to go down the storm sewer. There he goes. Oh no. I hope he's okay. I froze again as I watched the water run into the drain. My legs felt like jelly, and I thought I was going to be sick, but I had to go find Parker. I charged down the sidewalk toward Andy's house and almost stepped on Parker. He was loaded down with the radio, an umbrella over one shoulder, and a lounge chair and a jug of lemonade over the other. I was surprised he could even stand up. "Hey, slow down, Joey," he said, dropping his stuff all over the sidewalk. "One wrong step, and you would have squashed me for supper." Oh no. Look, there's Parker right down there, and Andy was about to step on him. Uh-oh. Hope they're not too late. "Oh, Parker," I gasped, you got to come to the swimming hole fast." Sure, I'm coming," he said as he leaned over to pick up his stuff. "But it's going to take me a few minutes to get all this gear down there." "But Parker," I pleaded, "Andy's in trouble. He went to the swimming hole because I said I'd watched him, and I wasn't supposed to leave the yard, and the fire hydrant was on, so I went up the block to play in it, and the water washed Andy down the storm sewer." I said it all so fast, and I wasn't sure Parker understood, but he caught most of the important part. "Did you say Andy was washed down the storm sewer?" he said, dropping his gear all over the sidewalk again. "Uh-huh," I said, wiping away a tear. "Well, let's go." Parker yelled as he hopped on my right sneaker, and we ran back down the sidewalk. Oh, there he is talking to him, and there he is. There's Parker on Andy's sneaker. He's okay. He's okay. When we got to the gutter, Parker took one look at the water gushing down the drain and said, "Oh no, if only I hadn't taken so much time to find all my gear. We'd better go get my dad." We ran over to the vacant lot where Mr. Ant worked building ant condominiums. Parker jumped off my shoe and ran to find his dad. When his dad heard what had happened to Andy, he rounded up several of his best workers. They all got on my sneaker, and we nearly flew back to the gutter in front of my house. While Andy's dad was deciding what to do, the fireman up the street turned off the hydrant, and the gush of water became a trickle. Just as Mr. Ant was moving things into action, a little ant head popped up from the edge of the storm sewer grate. It was Andy. "Andy," we yelled, "you're safe!" All right. Woo, there's Andy. He just came up out of the water. Hooray. I'm so glad he's okay. That was a little scary. You okay? I'm okay. "Yeah," he said with a smile as his dad ran over to wrap him in a towel and hug him. "But I thought I was a goner for sure. I was really glad I was on the leaf because it got stuck in the grate, and I was able to get off and hold on to the bottom side of the grate until the water stopped. Just think, I might have been floating somewhere under the city of Grand Ant by now. Maybe I wouldn't even have been floating at all." You're right, Andy," said Mr. Ant. "This could have been much worse, but it wouldn't have happened if you'd waited for Parker like I told you to." Andy looked down at the ground, and I felt pretty bad about talking him into going swimming. While Mr. Ant helped Andy dry off, I decided I should explain that it wasn't all Andy's fault. Mr. Ant listened as I told him what had happened, and Parker even apologized for taking so long to find his gear. Since everything seemed to be under control, Mr. Ant and his workers went back to the vacant lot, but before he left, he told Andy and Parker that there would be a serious talk at the house that evening. As Parker walked back up the sidewalk to pick up his scattered gear, Andy and I sat down on the curb. "Boy," he said, "I just hate it when Dad says we're going to have a serious talk. I'd rather he'd spank me so it would be over faster." Then he looked at me. "But you know, Joey," he said in his philosopher voice, "we were both wrong in what we did today. I should have obeyed my dad and not gone swimming without Parker. I've even heard your mom say that God wants us to obey our parents, and you should have stayed there to watch me like you promised you would." "I'm really sorry, Andy," I said, afraid I was going to cry again. "I know you are," Andy said, still talking in his low, serious voice. Oh, there's Andy's dad drying him off. And there's Joey and Andy talking on the sidewalk. It's important to listen to our parents. It's important to obey them. Just then I heard my mother call from the front door. "Joseph Tyler Johnson," she said to me, "where have you been? I thought I told you not to leave the yard. You come right here now. I think we need to have a little talk about obeying your parents." Coming, Mom," I said. Then I looked down at Andy and shrugged. "I guess I get to learn 2 lessons today instead of 1. He just smiled and said, "Well, be sure to listen close. Your mom's pretty smart for a person." "I will, Andy," I promised, I said, getting up to go inside. Later, as I got ready for bed, I thought about the day. I was glad everything had turned out all right, and I was really glad Andy was safe. I remembered the look on his face as the leaf had been washed away. Then I smiled. I'm so glad that my parents love me so much. I'm glad they teach me what's right and wrong and the truth about God in the Bible. I need to ask God to help me to obey my mom and dad and do what makes him glad. And one thing's for sure, I said with a little laugh, with Andy for a friend, This summer will never be boring. Then I hurried to get ready for bed, looking forward to tomorrow and my next adventure with Andy Ant. Oh, there's Joey talking to his mom. And there's Joey thinking of what a great summer it's going to be and how he's going to have a good time with Andy Ant. What a great book that was. Thank you for joining me, Dan the Story Man, for another book. And thank you for reading this book about Andy Ant and the swimming hole disaster. I'm glad it was okay. I hope you have a good summer. Listen to your parents. Obey them like God wants you to. And be safe out there. Make good choices. And I'll talk to you soon. Until then, toodaloo, ta-ta, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.